Hello, I'm Dr. Angie McCartney.
And I'm Ruth McCartney.
Welcome to TeaFlix,
where each episode's intimate conversation features a fascinating guest across the spectrum of Beatles world, pop culture, Grammy winners, the music industry, chefs, producers, music stars, actors, and more. So bottoms up and join us as they spill the tea on TeaFlix. Dun, dun, dun. And it says once again,
One more time.
Happy Tuesday. We are live.
Hello, folks.
Happy TeaFlix. And I hope everybody's got either their corkscrews out or their kettles on, depending upon what time zone you're in. And if you're listening to this back on YouTube or any one of the big podcast streaming episodes, of course, help yourself to a refreshing beverage of any description. So today we're super thrilled. We welcome legendary entertainment entrepreneur and author Miles Copeland III, who is an articulate and charismatic businessman, entrepreneur, and influencer with a track record of being at the forefront of innovation in the music and entertainment industries. His constant focus on evolution and revolution is dominant throughout his varied and successful career, which spans 5 decades and is littered with household names. From being at the center of the British progressive rock and punk rock scenes in the late 60s and 70s, to launching record labels and managing hugely successful bands and musicians such as The Police, Sting, Squeeze, REM, The Bangles, and more, Jules Holland, one of my faves, Miles spent over 30 years working with artists who dominated the charts in the US, in the UK, and internationally across the world. His inspiring ability to manage and grow talent, identify and influence changes in the market, and develop highly creative and innovative promotional strategies has resulted in countless hit singles and albums, Grammy Awards, and Gold and Platinum records, as well as some surprising but hugely successful collaborations. Meanwhile, his latest series of live touring projects has focused on creating a brand that can operate successfully with whatever artists might be available at any given time, creating both ownership and longevity for each concept. His entrepreneurial approach has enabled him to find solutions when routes to market were closed, or evolve his business model when the internet fundamentally changed the industry. His experience and vision have led to numerous speaking engagements for companies including Motorola, HSBC Bank, Vanderbilt University, the University of California, the Grammy Organization, and a host of music-associated media. Miles spent his childhood and adolescence moving between the US, Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon. His mother worked for British intelligence, and his father was in U.S. Army counterintelligence, as well as being a founder member of the CIA. I'll just leave that name right there for you.
I'll pick it up.
Yeah, there you go. Miles's cultural awareness and global outlook have been a common theme throughout his career, which has included boosting the popularity of Arab music and dance in the U.S., as well as advising the Pentagon on how to win hearts and minds.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine that. So as an author, he penned the cultural classic One Step Forward, Two Steps Back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I'm on drugs today, which tells the extraordinary story of a maverick manager, promoter, label owner, and all-round legend of the music industry. And without further ado, it is our ultimate pleasure to welcome Mr. Miles Copeland.
Hello.
Well, if I wasn't a manager of all of those bands, but
okay.
I recorded them. So you
anyway. manager, producer.
It sounded good.
Yes, not all.
Muse, entrepreneur, magic Willy Wonka person, I would say, behind the scenes of all of those. Did you ever have any musical aspirations yourself? Did you learn the trumpet or the guitar or anything growing up?
No, I tried the trumpet, but it's a very difficult instrument. When I was 10 or 11, following in the footsteps of my father, who was a trumpeter.
Right.
But before he joined the Army and went to the CIA and all OSS and all that sort of thing. But no, I never had any. I was never inspired to be a musician.
Okay, well, it takes a village, doesn't it, to put this all on. So, going back to sort of Act One, what we would call the early hustle and chaos. So,
yeah, welcome, Miles. Yeah. Now, yes, you've often said that your career really began with a disaster. Looking back now, do you think success in the music business requires a near catastrophic failure early on?
Well, I think if I look back over, you learn as much or maybe more from making mistakes as you do from having success.
Yeah.
So success is often luck, whereas mistake, you actually do something and you realize that you made a mistake, and you learn from that, So I would say, so when I made the title of my book, Two Steps Forward, One Step Back, was in a sense a recognition of the fact that, you could move forward, but you're going to make a mistakes. You'll inevitably take the step back, So, but you learn from those things as well. So I would say I probably learned as much from mistakes as I did from successes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, with the longevity thing, you can always look back on your mistakes and go, not going to do that again, right? Which only adds.
I mean, you learn what works and what doesn't.
Right. So one of the very first act, I believe, that you handled was Wishbone Ash, which is legendary now, but I guess was a little bit difficult to get off the ground back in those days. And there was a character you talked about called Rick Sims, who played into that situation in that booking scene. How did that pan out with Rick Sims, and how did you meet him?
Well, it was basically I entered the music business knowing literally zero. I had just got rejected from the U.S. Army, showed up in London, and I was met by this group, and they said, "Look, they want me to manage them." And I said, "Look, I don't know anything about the music business." And they said, "Well, I'll show you." And I bought a local rag, one of the music papers, and it was called The Melody Maker. And then there was a little ad in the back of it saying, buy this book, and it'll give you the names and the phone numbers of all the clubs and all the places that you might want to book a group in England,
Wow.
So I didn't know any better. So I called the number, and I was answered by this guy called Rick Sims, and he sounded like a charlatan, but I was desperate. I knew literally nothing about the music business, and I was managing this group, and they expected something out of me, so I was out of sheer desperation. And he said to me, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll come over and I'll show you how it works. And then I'll just pay me 10%. And if I book something, you can see what to do,
Yeah.
Anyway, so I figured, well, what the hell, So then I met the guy, and he really looked like a crook, He smelled like a crook. Everything about him was a crook. But the book turned out, and then he got on the phone, and he came over and he booked stuff, and the first gig worked. Of course, the second gig didn't, and the group kept calling me. They would go off for They would say the street address is wrong, and then I would call Rick up and say, Rick, the group is at the address you gave me. And he says, it's not SW7, it's SW17, you idiot. I'd say, well, okay. So I call the group back through and say it was SW17. Well, of course, there was no club of SW17. So then I realized that I was been made a fool of. And so I started checking all the phone, the bookings that were in the, and of course I realized pretty soon that all of them were phony, I had the phone hang up, or the phone number didn't work, or they stopped booking groups or whatever,
Oh,
But it shocked me so much and embarrassed me so much that I decided that I would use the book and I would start phoning up places. And sure enough, the phone numbers mostly were pretty good. So the book had a value, I guess, but I was out of pure desperation. Cold calling is difficult, let's face it. You get on the phone and to cold call and say, hi, and I actually got a few bookings. And so the next day when the group came over, I said, well, the bad news is this guy turns out to be a crook. We all knew it, but, but I actually got some bookings, and so I managed to carry on,
Wow.
and
Well, if he was getting 10% and there were no bookings, did he charge you some exorbitant amount for the book?
Well, no. Back then it probably was the equivalent of I figured, well, it was a good education, so I asked for some money back, and I think he gave me a few pounds or something. But in the end of the day, I said, what the hell? it was a good education, and I got launched, and I learned my lesson. And you know, it was the first lesson. It was a huge mistake, but yeah, I learned from it, and I went on to become a decent manager.
Yeah.
At least I was told I was a decent manager.
Oh, yes, sir.
Well, now at that early London scene, sharing space with people like Malcolm McLaren, for example, what separated those who
Here.
who talked about changing the industry from those who, like you?
Well, that was much later on. I mean, I
Was
think
it?
that was in you know, I started in the business in 1970, really.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 1977 that I met Malcolm McLaren, and
No.
he happened to have an office above me, and I realized that he was in this whole new generation of music that was interesting, and I had just been through a huge disaster, and I had no money anymore, and so the punks didn't have any money. Nobody paid any attention to them. So I did pay attention to them, and which is why I met Malcolm McLaren, and you know, but I was thrown out of his office. He actually threw me out, and I realized in the end that he wasn't a manager at all. He was interested in publicity, and he was great at it. You know, so he was, you know, he threw me out saying, I don't want any gigs. Don't you understand? I get more publicity saying the group can't do a show than if they do a show. And I then realized that it was not about, of course, the group wanted to play shows.
Yeah,
Of course.
But that wasn't Malcolm's idea. So I don't really recognize him as a manager, to tell you the truth, because he didn't work for the group. He worked for himself.
yeah.
Yeah, I think he was, to me growing up, he was kind of a brand, a ringleader. He wanted to be a personality. Maybe he couldn't play an instrument or carry a tune in a bucket, but, you know, he aligned himself not only with his groups, but Betsy Johnson and Chelsea and the King's Road and that whole scene, didn't he? He sort of branded himself.
Well, I learned a lot from him. I mean, I really learned the lessons of publicity.
Yeah.
So I would say Malcolm was a very interesting person to know, but I wouldn't have called him a manager in the sense that, you know, I mean, I considered myself a manager because I worked for, my job was to make a band successful. You know, that was, I considered to be my job. That was not what Malcolm McLaren was doing. You know, but publicity is the main thing. I mean, that has been consistent through Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, Bush Monash, the Police, you name it. You know, the music business can change, but there's nothing that ever changes with regard to the fact that if you don't know something exists, it doesn't succeed. So you have to. So publicity is the essence of what a manager is responsible for doing, and for an act. And you know, you could either write a hit song or you do something outrageous, but you get attention. And getting attention, getting eyeballs to look at what you're doing is the secret of success. So people say, oh, the music business has totally changed. And I say, well, there's some things that never change. You have to get to be known. And that job, okay, maybe there's a different way of doing it now. Maybe there's different ways you can get to be known, but it's still about getting to be known.
Oh, yeah, because again, like you say, you can be the most brilliant musician in the world in your basement with the door shut and no social media following, no actual fan base. You know, what I've been evangelizing for years is when John Lennon used to come and stay with us, he used to get under the dining table and look at all the fan mail and call them customers. And I used to say, well, Uncle John, they're fans. And he's like, yeah, but we have their addresses. We can write back to them. We can build a list. They're our customers. And so, you know, the flip side of the publicity thing is once people know who you are, you start collecting all their information and you build an army, and then they go and tell 10 friends, and then they go and tell 10 friends. And then, you know, publicity is a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that is the essence of really what it's all about. And you make it, you can be lucky and have success. But it's hard work usually. I mean, you know, there's the old joke in the music business, you know, you struggle for 10 years and then you're an overnight success.
I once wrote a song called Overnight Success, and that's exactly what it's about. So you alluded to the disaster, which is a big part of your fabulous book. To go a little bit more into the detail that sort of how did you get into it and how did you get out of it and what was it?
Well, my career started off really with sort of progressive rock bands, basically where the guitarist was the hero, and it was, the era of Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and, all these sort of guitar heroes. The singer was sort of, and the fact that you could play was important. Okay. And I basically put together this big tour of Europe and I got all these different groups, together, including the groups that I managed. And I did this big festival tour across Europe, which was very successful in exposing the bands and opening up new markets and all that. But it was financially a quagmire. And I learned, what goes up goes down. And I learned that, things, if you can't deliver exactly what you say, you're going to be heisted by the promoters and everybody else. So I basically ended up penniless at the end of this tour. The groups ended up quite successful, but I didn't end up successful at all. So I was literally penniless. I moved back to live with my parents and all that sort of stuff. So, and then I gravitated to the punk rock movement. And the fact was that that I didn't have any money, they didn't care because they didn't have any money either, and nobody was paying attention to them. But I decided I would pay attention to them, and I knew the music business, So I was, I guess, a bit of a rare character, because most of the music business rejected the fact that they would say things like they can't play.
Yeah.
But that didn't really matter. It didn't matter that he couldn't play. I mean, look, some of the groups that, started and somebody would say, well, I'll be the drummer. And
yes,
the guy had never seen a drum kit before, So that was the beauty of the punk rock thing is that basically it was just get out and do it. It didn't matter that you couldn't really play or you didn't know how to tune your guitar. It didn't really matter so much.
Thrash. We were in the early management business many moons ago, and I have seen many of those bands at the Roundhouse in London. And boy, there was one kid, I'll never forget, funny story. He's like, me bass keeps going out of tune, innit? And somebody else taking the piss said to him, oh mate, he says, take it down the local auto body shop, get it in tune and just get them to weld the keys shut, innit?
Yeah. Well, I remember watching The Clash the first time, and I swear that they didn't know they didn't know that the guitars could be tuned. Later, they became pretty good players,
Wow.
The Go-Go's, for instance, the drummer had never. I mean, I remember Charlotte Caffey, who had wrote the big hits for the Go-Go's, had said to one of the guitar players, I think Jane Weedland or something, said, look, it would help actually if you plugged your guitar into the amplifier. They didn't realize that, but the fact is that it was the spirit that they had, which was what was infectious.
Yeah.
And the fact that they really weren't great musicians when they started, they became great musicians, but when they started, they weren't. And that really didn't matter. It was really the spirit of it that people gravitated towards. It was the I'm going to do it, and that had sort of an infectious attitude.
Yeah, and I think if the fans, again, I was a huge Go-Go's fan, still love Belinda and what she's accomplished. And it's like, I wanted to be a pop star because that's what you did. And, they gave me hope and inspiration because all of a sudden it's an all girl band and girls weren't, women weren't huge in the music industry in the late 70s, early 80s, unless you were a Linda Ronstadt or a solo person. And so, I didn't really care. I went to see them on Sunset Boulevard. It wasn't the greatest acoustical show I've ever seen, but you're right. It just gave me well, hell, if they can do it, I can have a bash. I can have a go,
That was the secret of it. I mean, the reality was that I was the only person from the record business in at the Marquee Club, in the where the Whiskey A Go-Go, it was on Sunset Boulevard, in LA. And I was the only one there. And I looked up at the Go-Go's, and there was something happening. I mean, the place was packed. People were pogoing. The place was going crazy. And I looked around, and there wasn't a single other person from the record company there. And of course, I immediately went up and met the group and said, "Look, I want to sign you to my label." And of course, RS Records at that time we were not a successful label. We were connected with A&M Records, which is of course very successful, but we'd never really had a hit, and we were not, on the first list of every record company that you'd want to join.
Right.
So the Go-Go's basically said they didn't really want to sign to IRS Records. So their manager went around to all the other record companies, and every other record company rejected them, mainly because they were women. And they said, well, a girl group has never been successful, so we're not interested. But I was interested. So they finally came back to me and they said, okay, we'll sign to you.
Oh, wow.
And we went out and we banged the hell out of that record. And I had a young radio guy named Michael Plen who was very instrumental, and he just wouldn't accept no for an answer. And he used to go to radio stations and say, "You got to play the Go-Go's," and just to shut him up, they would play the Go-Go's. To get him out of their office, they would play the record, and lo and behold, it went to number one.
Oh my God. Sometimes it's you're right. It's a combination of pluckiness, perseverance, and publicity. It's all those things. But they all have to come together at the right time. I mean, you were really at the fulcrum of just all of it. And then I think just your sheer force of will and personality, and of course, talent and connections and reputation, made IRS, and I love the police and IRS, and then all of the
people, let's not forget that in the beginning, I mean, everybody, even people at A&M Records, they were laughing at the Go-Go's and saying, well, they've got top 50. Well, that's pretty good for a first time out of a band. And they go, no, we think we can get it higher. It would go to 30, and then you go to 20, and then to 10. But I was signing up groups right, left, and center, because I was the only game in town basically that would pay attention to these groups. Yeah. Once the Go-Go's went to number one, everybody kind of woke up to the fact, well, maybe this Copeland guy knows what he's doing. So I would go to shows and I would look around. All of a sudden, there would be other record companies there. See? So I found that my success created competition, and now I was competing with, Warner Brothers and the bigger, CBS, etc. And of course, it became harder and harder to sign acts, and you had to pay out real money, And so all of a sudden, I was no longer the new kid on the block who, other labels began to sign out acts and have success, and the music became successful. And the Police, it wasn't until the fifth album of the Police that we had the first number one.
Mm-hmm. That would be what, late 70s, early 80s, the Go-Go's. And I was working on right next door to La Dome on Sunset. I was the receptionist at Jet Records for Sharon Arden and her father, Don, which was an interesting job. And all of a sudden, because of you, I heard your name 1,000 times a week in the office. They were like, well, Miles is out there signing all these acts. They decided to give me an extra $25 a week and some business cards and make me an A&R person. So I was out in the clubs standing there looking, part of the competition.
That was you, was it?
That was me all along. Yep. In my little red Fiesta. But you're right, because, in the early days, nobody gave a shit. And there you were really championing the bands and their perspicacity. Ooh, do I get extra points for that? And it did create competition. And so I'd be going to gigs elbow to elbow, and all of a sudden, you're right, the labels all started lining up. It was fantastic. So thank you, sir, for that, on behalf of the artists.
Yeah, I found it much, much harder later on. And, this is really why IRS finally wound down, because we just couldn't compete with the likes of a Warner Brothers or somebody. They could say, whatever Miles offers you, we'll double it.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
And then what was I going to say to that? You know,
right, exactly.
Now, when you first got involved with the police, what did you see that others missed? And what specifically did you build around them that turned them into this global force?
well, I think, you know, really, I recognized that they were. I really recognized a song, Roxanne, was something special,
Oh, yeah.
and the group didn't recognize it. But once that song succeeded, then Sting had all these other songs in his, you know, that started coming out. You know, so really the police success wasn't just me. It was also Sting songs. You know, those songs had a, you know, Walking on the Moon, Message in a Bottle. I mean, those were classic songs, you know, Every Breath You Take, you know. So there was sort of but the other thing about the police that was very important was that all three members really wanted to succeed. They were going for it. They went for it. They were hungry. And I think that energy showed when they walked on stage.
Yep.
And they had the music, and Sting looked great. And, you know, I was coming up with stunts, and I think it was it's hard to say there's any one thing that was a reason for success. It was really the combination of all the things.
Yeah.
Right. Isn't there a lovely story where some muckety muck British lord came backstage to a show and started saying, "Oh, well, I've got free tickets and I've got a meeting and whatever." Do you remember that? Where was that?
There was a show in Miami, and I mean, I used to have, I mean, when the police got to be very big, people would want to come and figure out they could come and see the show. So some guy showed up in a Rolls Royce backstage.
Yeah.
Said he was Lord so and so, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've just been speaking to Miles Copeland, and I've got free tickets." And he said, "Oh, come on down to the show." And so this guy shows up with a couple of girls and a guy, and you know, in a Rolls Royce, whatever it is. So this roadie comes to me and says, "By the way, there's this friend of yours who says he's got you've invited him to the show." And I said, "Where is he?" "Well, he's back in the parking lot there with his car and is waiting to get in, you know." So I walked up there, and the guy didn't know me from Adam, you know. So I said, "So you're speaking to Miles Copeland?" He said, "Oh yeah, I was speaking to him this morning, you know, and we're good friends." I was going like, "I never seen you before in my life.
Wow.
If you really want to come to the show, then you give me $200 and I'll get you behind the seats and to give you some shit seats." So the guy was so embarrassed. He whipped out the money, and I mean, I charged him three or four times the price for the tickets, and I gave him terrible seats. So I walked back into the group, and I say, "By the way, there's this guy," and I told him the story. And you know what their first thing they said to me was, "Where's our share?"
Where's the money?
How much?
So I had to dole out money to each of the guys, three guys, you know.
Oh my God. Yeah, our friend Elizabeth.
But I had to, you know, this happened a lot. I mean, so people were always trying something to get in or get in for free or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I can't remember where I was when I heard Roxanne, but it stopped my traffic. Elizabeth saying when she first heard Roxanne on the radio, I called my brother into the room, she says, and says, "These guys are going to be the next Beatles." Well, she wasn't wrong. Absolutely. Why didn't they want Roxanne on the record?
They thought it was too sweet. They thought it was, you know, remember, this was the punk rock era when everything was bash 'em up, you know, and ba 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 ba, fuck you, you know, everything was aggressive, you know. Roxanne is really a love song, and it was minimalist. It was everything that the, you know, the punk rock thing was really against, really. So for that reason, they didn't really, they dismissed the song.
Good grief. And it also had some kind of a reggae vibe, which was very hot in North London at the time, but might not have fit into the punk scene in their estimation, right?
Well, I think that the punks really gravitated towards reggae, which was also sort of a
counterculture.
not a popular sort of music form, and they needed something to play before they went on stage, so they would play reggae,
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
and it was sort of a left field kind of music as well as the punk thing was.
yeah, it's counterculture. I think it just is never, it wouldn't have been on BBC Radio 2. And so, if you can smash them up or smoke a spliff and play a guitar, well, why the hell not, right? Back in those days. Now, isn't there a story about Cherry Vanilla's backing? But was Cherry Vanilla managed by Malcolm McLaren, or do I have that upside down? How did Cherry Vanilla come in?
No, she had been in LA, in New York, and she had been a publicity person for, I think, David Bowie. She'd been a publicity person, so she knew how to get publicity. And I was going to bring her to England because she was sort of one of the names that was cropping up in, Patti Smith and John Cale and Wayne County and Cherry Vanilla. They were all sort of the punk names that you begin to hear out of America, So I went to Cherry Vanilla. I had met her in New York, and I said, well, I'll bring you to England. And she had this guitar player, but she didn't have a band. I said, well, so I went to the police and I said, well, look, I went to Sting and Stewart and I said, look, I'll put you guys in the Cherry Vanilla band and you can play bass and drums, but you can have the opening set. So, we'll get you exposure that way.
Yep.
So they learned something from Cherry Vanilla, because her guitar player was a pretty good songwriter, so. And they got exposure, playing out as they played as the Police, and then the show would end, and then they would come out as Cherry Vanilla, and Sting and Stewart would be the bass player and the drummer, so the backing band.
Talk about double duty. I mean, I just don't know how many people know that story. When we were researching you these last few days, it's just like, good grief, I'd never put those two things together in the same sentence, but I guess it worked for everybody.
Well, the reality was it was very hard to get gigs for the Police because nobody really wanted to know. They said, well, Sting is old and Stewart was in Curved Air, and are they really punks? I mean, I had a hard time getting gigs for the Police.
Yeah.
So this was sort of stratagem to get them exposed. So we ended up doing about 30 or 40 shows because I could book Cherry Vanilla, but I had a hard time booking the Police. So I put the two together, and I got exposure for the Police.
Oh, that's wild. And Andy was in a not a Bonzo Dog Doodah band, but Andy Summers was in a band with Viv Stanshall, who then went on to Bonzo. There was a lot of band swapping going on in those days, wasn't there? When you think about
I didn't know Andy until he joined the Police, really, and
later on,
because he had been in Soft Machine and various other bands, and he was sort of a known guitar player, but he could play anything, which was, once he joined the Police, Sting said, well, he all of a sudden songs that he would not offer the Police because their guitar player was not at that point a particularly great guitar player.
Got it.
This guy could play anything. So all of a sudden Sting said, well, if he's our guitar player, then I can come up with these other songs, So all of a sudden Message in a Bottle and Can't Stay Losing You and all these songs became songs they could use.
Wow, that's truly amazing. We used to see Andy down here in Playa del Rey, where we live near LAX. There was a luthier, and he would come and have guitars made or tuned or fixed or whatever down here. And you'd, see him in the local coffee shop, and you'd just be kind of a gobsmack to be like, oh, there you go. It's like walking around London in the 60s, coming out the bag of nails. You might see God only knows who, from Hendrix to Lennon to whatever, but we're not used to it down here in Playa del Rey, Now, speaking of different kinds of music or whatever, your ear must have been tuned as a young person to sort of different cadences.
Yeah, growing up between the United States and the Middle East, it's a unique upbringing, isn't it? Well, how did that shape your instincts in both business and cultural storytelling
and musical taste?
Yeah.
Uh, well, I don't know really. I mean,
I mean,
how
'cause
does one becomes what one becomes, and
right.
why you become that way? Who knows?
Yeah.
Is it
Fair enough.
genetics? Is it exposure? You know, I didn't really think much of Arabic music when I was growing up. I was interested in Elvis Presley and later on the Beatles and then the Doors and
Sure.
Jimi Hendrix, etc.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until later on that I realized that the Middle Eastern music with the quarter notes and the oud and the instrumentation mixed with the Western bass and a Western drum and the 4/4 beat. All of a sudden, you start thinking, "Well, that music really works." So I think I was probably open to music which would be a because I had grown up in these different countries.
Right.
So I was not just listening to one kind of music when I grew up. But how that affected me, I don't really know. All
Yeah.
I know is when I got to London, I knew nothing.
Right. I
You
love
learn
that.
fast.
Because yeah, the Arabic and then the Indian scales they're completely different, which is why George Harrison got completely fascinated with Ravi Shankar and the sitar and whatever. But I love me some Arabic music and Turkish music, and when I heard Sting's and I dream of rain, LA, LA, and he's using those little Arabic influences. Do you think the world is fully caught up on sort of the global music scene, or do you think it still has a way to go to share all of that knowledge?
Well, I think there have been successful bands now. I mean, if you look at Shakira from
Yep.
she's big. You look at I mean, there are bands in Holland, bands in Germany, bands that come from all over the place.
Right.
Um, and the song the one you just referenced was a combination of rye music, which was sort of an Arabic influenced music, with Sting. But again, that American record companies turned their nose up at that, said, "Well, it'll never be a hit, and forget it."
It's crazy.
And but Sting was committed to the song, and so was I, and I loved Chef Mami is singing, even though
Yeah.
I didn't understand what he was saying. He was singing in Arabic, but it's a dialect which I was very different than a Lebanese Arabic that I grew up with.
Right.
But I loved the combination of the two.
I did too.
And it wasn't until I created a commercial, and the, the Jaguar put a lot of money into the
Yep.
song, and that became a huge hit, and it opened people's eyes to the fact that this music could work.
Yeah.
But some of these acts, that you probably have never heard of, are very big in certain parts of the world. And
Sure.
now we've got big stars who are Korean acts, the
That's
K-pop bands, and so it's not just music from the USA that's successful. I
right.
mean, the USA and England, remember in the beginning, people dismissed English music.
That's right.
It wasn't until the Beatles that all of a sudden people paid attention. I mean,
That's
there were stars in England well before the Beatles.
Oh God, absolutely. Sure.
But we did.
Went
Then
small.
Australia and
Yep.
other artists
Yeah.
became successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I really admire people, Sting especially, but people like that who go out of their way to bring a crossover artist in and sort of not force us to listen, but open our ears to the different cadences and the different scales and the different mathematics, and who knows what happens to your brainwaves when you're listening to all that kind of music. I mean, you talk about people who are absolutely huge, like Elvis, and one of whom was the catalyst for you opening an office in Paris that maybe couldn't get arrested in South Africa, and that's Zucchero. How did you get involved with him? I mean, he's like the god of Italy, the king of Italy, and the king of Europe. Love
Yeah.
him.
I love Zucchero. He's great. Um, he came to a songwriter retreat that I was holding. I had bought this castle. Well, where I am right now actually is this castle in France, which is a bit of a lunacy. I'd sold my record company and I had money in the bank, and so I bought a castle.
As you do.
And then I thought to myself, what the hell have I done? I bought a castle in France. And then I dreamed up this idea of, I need songs, and Zucchero showed up to one of the songwriter retreats along with Cher and various others, John Bon Jovi and others, And then he said, well, you should be my manager. And I thought, well, what the hell, But really, what he wanted was an international manager, and so he took me to Italy, where he was already a huge star. And I had a partner called Henry Padovani who could speak Italian and French and English, and was the first guitar player in the Police, who'd become a pretty good guitar player and songwriter as well. And so he helped me with Zucchero, and we ended up having a big hit in Spain and in France, and so we broadened the base of Zucchero. But really, it was all about Italy,
Yes.
So, but I learned a lot from him. Really, I mean, he would how he wrote songs, and the getting accounting was always a big issue with him. He would say, I would say, well, I have to audit you because I have to figure out whether you owe me money or not. He said, if you audit me, I'm going to fire you. Well, finally, I said, okay, I have to audit because I just really have no clue where we are. He said, okay, you're fired.
Oh, God. Well, honestly, Miles, I'm shocked.
But he and I are really good friends now.
I'm shocked that there would ever be an accounting dispute with an Italian, but I just don't know how that happened to you. That's just really unfortunate.
Surprise!
Well, I would say the accounting system is like the catacombs of Rome.
Yes, exactly.
And wine.
2 euros forward, 5 euros back.
Right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So completely shifting, your managerial hat.
Yeah. So, you've even advised the Pentagon, I believe, on hearts and minds. What was that all about? That's a long way from rock and roll, isn't it?
Well, I had become an expert because I was having a hard time signing up acts from, all these record companies competing with me, but nobody was competing with me for putting out Arabic music in America, So I was signing up every big superstar in the Middle East, So I probably knew more about Arabic music than any other living human being in America, And I was putting out their records. So, Amr Diab and all these, Ragab Alama and, Hakim and all these stars that were I was putting out their records in America and bringing them to America and all this sort of thing. And so the Pentagon had heard that I they'd called up the Recording Institute of America. They say that we've invaded, Iraq, and we've got to do something to win hearts and minds. Is there anybody in the music business that can help us? And they said, well, there's only one guy that knows anything about Arabic music, and it's this Miles Copeland. So I got a phone call from Donald Rumsfeld's office,
Donald Rumsfeld?
Yeah. My secretary came to me and says, it's Donald Rumsfeld on the phone. I said, well, piss off, No, it really is. It's the Pentagon. They're asking for you personally. I said, well, I thought it was a joke.
Of course.
But sure enough, it really was, And so I said, well, they wanted to tell me these ideas that they had to win hearts and minds, which is basically pretty stupid ideas. So I said, well, I'll be happy to, being a good American, I decided I would help the Pentagon. And they sent me all these programs that they were planning. And they said, well, vet them and call us back and tell us what you think. And I called them back. I said, well, actually, the programs you've come up with are all counterproductive. And if you do them, it's going to lead to disaster. So they said, well, what should we do? I said, well, they said, well, will you come to the Pentagon and tell us?
Oh, God.
So I said, well, I was not going to miss that. I figured, well, if I ever write a book, I'll have a chapter of me going to the Pentagon, I mean, that sounds like a good one, So I dutifully went off, with my Brooks Brothers suit and looking as straight as I could be, going to the Pentagon. Of course, I read the review of my arrival. It sounded like it was Clint Eastwood, for Fistful of Dollars going to the Pentagon. I mean, I, I don't know who that guy was, but he sure sounded good. Anyway,
Oh,
I told them
man.
what they could do, which they promptly dismissed. They said, yeah, it was the best meeting they ever had, and
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
but
Wow.
they didn't pay any attention to what I had to say, because I don't think that they were really listening anyway. And it was the disaster as usual.
As per, yep. But music does make the world go round. If they have listened and got some program into cross-culturalizing the arts and listening to each other's hearts and minds, that really is the way, I think.
Well, I think that Americans grow up thinking we really don't know that the rest of the world exists.
Yeah.
And I mean, we see that today in Iran, where Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and whatever go off and have these meetings. They have no clue about what's making the Iranians tick, any more than anybody had a clue about the Iraqis. Or so the mistake after mistake after mistake was made, and we lost how many troops and how many millions of dollars in Iraq.
Yeah.
And we're doing the same in Iran, and we never learn.
Mhm.
And there are experts who can tell you, but people figure, well, we know better than the experts, and so they figure that, well, we're America, so we ought to know better. Well, you know what, we don't.
I think if you look at America like a giant corporation, it's like any big of our corporate marketing clients that we deal with. They're siloed. The marketing people know about marketing, but they don't know about sales, and the sales people never talk to the IT people, and they won't take each other's advice. It's like all of these government departments, and I think it happens in every country and every administration. I'm the expert on so-and-so, and I'm not going to take advice from anybody. And they dig their heels in, and then it leads to the world we live in now. Because nobody's.
I mean, there's so many lessons that one can learn. I mean, there's an old saying, the history repeats itself.
Yeah.
And it really does. It
Yeah.
repeats itself, and you could learn a lot by studying history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, as you said in your book, 2 Steps Forward and 1 Step Book, it's full of unlikely turns, and you learn from your mistakes because they're your history. Do you think success nowadays in the, not just music, but the entertainment and the advertising industry, do you think it's about meticulous planning or recognizing a little kernel of opportunity inside the chaos that is social media and all of this other crap and just hanging on to that?
I don't think there's one rule that dominates, other than the fact that you have to be known. If you're not known, people don't know you exist,
That's right.
So how do you get to be known, And you can get to be known in a number of different ways. Maybe you write a hit song that happens out of the blue,
Right.
Maybe you do something crazy and then you get into the papers,
Right.
Maybe you look interesting, who knows what the reason is.
Yeah.
But for some reason you capture the imagination and people follow you, and there's no one rule, which makes it very interesting for a manager, to spot different things. If you have one idea only, maybe you're going to have one success.
Yeah.
Right.
But you have to be open-minded to there are different ways that things succeed. And there have been many artists that I've had that I thought were brilliant, this should have succeeded, but didn't. And and I realized there are certain ingredients to success.
Yeah.
And part of it is you have to really want it, and you have to do what's necessary, and you can't be too proud. You have to go out there and do it. And there's nothing like basically rolling your shirt sleeves up and going for it,
That's right.
And that the energy to go out and succeed, make it happen, to make it succeed.
Yeah.
Is really
It's a lot.
one of the reasons why something is successful in the first place.
Yeah.
I look at the ones that failed. I mean, there were artists that I've had that I thought were super talented, but they didn't have that hunger in them, and
Yep.
they just withered on the vine, you know.
Yeah, no, I hear that one.
The other thing is, no matter how good a manager is, you're only as good as the artist. You know, if the artist gives you some rope, great. You know, but
Right.
in the end of the day, you really need the artist to be able to walk out on that stage and deliver.
That's right. Barbara's saying a lovely thing. History repeats itself for the hard of hearing, and you all have great ears that listen, distinguishing the gems of art and wisdom. Well, thank you, Barbara. That's very, very sweet.
Very erudite.
I will have to photocopy that and write that down. That's a T-shirt for sure.
Yeah, there's one thing. Well, first of all, which artist taught you the most?
Oh, what
was there one?
Was there one valuable takeaway from one situation with one artist that you sort of go, that was?
You know, it's very hard to single out and say. People say, "Well, what's your favorite group?" And I say, "Well, it depends what mood I'm in."
Yeah, what's your favorite child?
Yeah,
what's your you know, that depends. You know, if I want to dance, there's one kind of group. If I want to listen, if I want to. There's no reason, and I think if you try to zero in on why something happened or what's the essence of it, I think you lose the essence of it.
Yeah,
you know, it's a combination of things, and luck has an element in it as well. You know,
yes,
you need a bit of luck, and you need hard work.
Yeah.
You know, is it just hard work? No. Is it just luck? No. Is it writing a hit song? Well, there have been a lot of hit songs that disappeared without a trace.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Who's to say why something is successful or why it wasn't?
Yeah.
You know.
Looking back, was there any artist you passed on or a deal you missed that still haunts you?
Well, there were artists that I mean, one of my favorite groups is the B-52s.
Yeah.
Rock Lobster, I thought was fantastic. You know. And I actually had made a deal to release that single, but then the police, I had to go off with the police. And by the time I got back to New York to make a deal with the B-52s for that song, they had signed up a manager, and the manager was already, time had passed. So I never was able to sign that group. But that was one of the groups that I should have signed, and I should have reacted to the moment and signed them on the spot, but I didn't. I went off and thought, well, I'd come back for that, and that was too late.
It wasn't there, but there was an act you signed who had a lead singer lady, I think she was the lead singer, called Jen, who was a trauma surgeon who had a house full of jars of interesting things. Right.
Speaking of eyeballs, I've read your book.
Speaking of getting eyeballs on things, how the hell?
Well, it was an artist. I had decided that I was going to make a label that was the most outrageous label and only going to sign outrageous groups. So I kind of called friends of mine and whatever it says that, if you know any outrageous group. Well, I got a phone call from this, I forget who it was, but it was somebody in Florida. They said, look, there's no group more outrageous than what we're going to tell you about the Genitorturers.
The Genitorturers?
They were called the Genitorturers. And the lady singer was a surgeon by day and a singer by night.
Okay.
And they were doing outrageous stuff. I mean,
Go on.
I said, well, I'll record them. They'll be the first group on this new label, which is going to be called Shock Therapy. It was going to be the outrageous group. Well, I could never find a group that was more outrageous than them.
Oh.
So it was a one-off signing. I could never come up with another group more outrageous. I mean, they were literally nailing scrotums to boards on stage. And that was the clean show. Then they said, well, wait till you see the X-rated show.
No thanks.
Which I never saw.
Oh my God. But didn't you go to her house?
No, no. I had a phone call from the engineer, and he said, "Look, I have to tell you, I just we had a phone call, and she was a surgeon. She had been called. There was a motorcycle accident, so she had gone to the hospital to deal with this, and said, well, it's a headless body. Well, where's the head? Well, it's in that helmet." And the guy, anyway, she did the autopsy, and anyway, it was one of those things. Anyway, the record was it was pretty outrageous. Yeah.
No kidding. Well, boy, there's
You'll have to read the book to know what I'm talking about, because obviously Miles isn't going to cough up and tell us.
No.
The fridge with the jar in it.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I did sign up. I mean, a lot of acts, if they were inexpensive, and you say, well, what the hell, it sounds interesting. And I did sign acts that I thought were interesting, and almost for the hell of it, because if it was a fortune, then I would say, well, no, it's too expensive.
Sure.
But occasionally I would get involved with something just because I thought it was interesting enough, and left the field enough that it was like, well, what the hell, I'll do it,
Wow.
And so there were some acts that I signed along the lines of, that I'd signed because they were interesting in of their own right.
Yeah. Well, your career has certainly not been for the faint of heart, and given your middle name, Axe, it's probably you have wielded certainly a commanding presence over the entertainment industry, and we thank you for all the music that you have discovered and pushed forward and championed, because without you, there is a lot of music that humanity just would not have heard.
And don't even think about retiring.
Good God, no.
We need you.
Yes, we do. The world
I'm not retiring. I'm still out there. Don't worry.
Oh,
good. Well,
Good
maybe you want to manage the 96.5, the world's oldest registered podcaster. You see,
There you go.
We could get her to do some.
That sounds interesting.
I could bling my walking frame and everything.
We could get her to do some pole dancing and all kinds of fun stuff.
All right.
The world is waiting for me.
Indeed.
Where do I sign?
Indeed. Well, she is also like you. She's an author. She has, I think you're working on your 8th or 9th book?
8th and 9th.
8th and 9th books. And one of them is called Mrs. McCartney's Liverpool Limericks and Other Random Irish Haikus. And she put pen to paper just for you. So if you are comfortable, sitting comfortably, which it looks like you are, we shall sing you out or poem you out with a lyric. Do you want to count it in for timing, madame?
Go. 1, 2, 3.
There once was a maverick named Miles, who nurtured raw talent in piles. From punk into pop, he rose to the top, delivering millions of smiles. Ta-da!
Oh, yeah. Don't give up your day job.
Exactly right. Thank you so much for joining us today. It has been honestly an honor and a joy, and
been a pleasure.
We're here right by LAX. Next time you're coming through, the kettle's on, and don't be a stranger. We'd love to
I'll have a cup of tea, darling.
Have a cup of tea, innit?
Yeah, gotta have a cup of tea.
Cup of tea.
Right.
Nope. All right, darling.
All right.
We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Miles. That's
Thanks for tuning in to TeaFlix, and check out Dr. Angie's books, Organic Teas and CBD at mrsmccartneysteas.com. Toodle pip.